Okay, thank you all for waiting so patiently. I am joined by James. Are you there?
Hi, Will. I am indeed, but I think you need to enable my video.
Yep. Give that a go.
Yes, here I am. Hello, everybody.
Brilliant. All right. And yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to our open day today, our UniAdmissions open day. Today we are going to be, well, actually, hold on. Let's introduce ourselves first. So my name is Will. I'm the head of consulting at UniAdmissions. So I look after our team of consultants, make sure they're all saying the right kind of stuff when we have students and parents that get in touch and have questions or need advice and things like that. And James?
Yeah, hi guys. So I'm a senior admissions consultant. So sort of my job to have chats with parents and students, find out a little bit more about you and your application plans and see if it's something that we can sort of support you with, really.
And yeah, so today we're both going to be here giving our thoughts and our ideas on the topic for today, which is, do I have a chance? Now, the idea of this seminar is really it's for those students who are interested or thinking about applying to very good universities for very competitive courses, and they're wondering, should I bother? Is there any point? Do they have a chance effectively? Because sometimes it's not easy to work that out on your own without having a very good understanding of what matters and how it all fits in. Next week, we are planning to talk a bit about medicine. So, there's we'll talk about more specific stuff at different points, but for now, we're going to be talking generally using examples from a range of different subjects. It's worth saying that there is a Q&A function. So as we go through, if you have questions, please do drop them in there. We won't be answering questions as we go. What we normally do is we go through everything, and then at the end, we do a big Q&A session. But to save you from having a really good question 5 minutes in and then forgetting it, please do just drop those in and we'll go through those all at the end. But let's get into it. So we'll split this up into a few different components. The first thing to establish is sort of what different parts of the application actually matter, how you're being measured, what they're going to be taken into account, because once we know that, you can then have a sense of, okay, well, how is it looking across these different components? Then we'll spend a bit of time looking into sort of admissions data across different subjects and across Oxford and Cambridge, because naturally it does vary. There are certain subjects which are ludicrously competitive, certain subjects which, has a higher number of people being given offers or at least being asked to interview compared to the total number of applicants. And then at the end, we'll sort of circle back around to admissions tests. You'll probably work out by that point that they're quite important. And we'll go in a bit of detail in terms of exactly how much of an impact they can make and what a good score on admissions test can mean for a student's application. I'm sure there are some of you who are currently about to go into year 13. There might even be some of you going into year 12, going into year 11, and going into year 10. Naturally, the things you can think about are going to vary depending on at what stage you are. Because if you've already sat your GCSEs, then there's not much we can do about them, and we can think about everything yet to come. Because if you haven't yet sat your GCSEs, you'll see that they do, come into play. And that's, of course, something which is also still in your control. Okay, so let's crack on. What matters in your application? Huge question, hugely important to have a good understanding of this. Otherwise, how on earth are you going to spend your time or know that you're spending your time on the right things? And ultimately, we break it down into these different parts. James, if you would be so kind to sort of explain what these are and what they all mean.
Yeah, so I think this graphic is a really sort of interesting way to think about how the universities are actually going to be going about their decision making when they're selecting students to give offers to and those not to give offers to. So, academics are very important, and I'm sure we're going to go into this in a lot more detail, but actually they represent just a small part of the overall picture. So it's important to note, actually, first of all, that this does change and vary slightly from university to university and course to course, but as a really good way of thinking about your application, we see that your academics account for about 30% of your application. The admissions tests accounts for another 30%. The interview, another 30%. And then that sort of final 10% we see to be things like personal statements, academic references, and sort of other less sort of tangible parts of this. And I think that's a really good way for you to think about how you're going to go about your preparation as well. Making sure that you're not spending all of your time on just a small part of the puzzle. You need to be quite effective with the way that you're preparing. So hopefully this sheds a little bit of light on kind of what's important.
And I think particularly with, with the overall question of, do I stand a chance? The big takeaway for students who might be thinking at the moment that their GCSEs maybe aren't quite as good as they'd like them to be, is actually, sort of up to 70% of the decision isn't going to be based on that. It's going to be based on other things that you still have control over. So yes, you might be a little bit behind on the sort of grade side of things, but there's plenty of scope for you to catch up. And you might be wondering, well, where does this all come from? What informs you guys when you say that the test matters this much and the interviews matter this much? And we gather it from a lot of data that sort of Oxford and Cambridge published through the years, but also from the way that they approach their evaluation of a candidate. So here, this is taken actually from the sort of evaluative process for a PPE candidate at Oxford or Cambridge, at Oxford. So you can see, so this is in terms of sort of trying to evaluate a student's sort of before they get to the interview stage. And the interview is obviously going to sort of factor into that as well. But you can see actually the test and the grades matter a lot. And then, that the AS grades, very few people actually take those anymore. Those don't really matter. And the personal statement actually, doesn't matter too much. A lot of people are often surprised by this, that the school reference seems to be more important, at least to the Oxford PPE admissions tutors, than their personal statements. And so, of course, this is part of the picture when we are integrating everything into an overall holistic appreciation of what goes in and what matters to them. But you can see, right at the top, you've got that admissions test there. The Gcses, very important as well, and the predicted grades coming into it. We do see that varies quite a lot from subject to subject, and so that should give you a bit of a sense as to where this is coming from. Like I said, one of the key takeaways is sort of 70–75% of what they're going to be measuring on you hasn't happened yet. Okay, so it's still very much within your control, but it's of course going to take some work. You shouldn't just sort of wait and twiddle your thumbs until November and then sit the test and be like, well, that hasn't gone very well, I don't stand a chance now, because you've got a lot that you can do to make a difference there. Lots of people also spend a hell of a lot of time on their schoolwork and not very much time at all on the admissions test. But the admissions test is more important than any individual GCSE or any individual A-level when it comes to this application. So to spend less time on it, and significantly less time, as lots of students do when they don't know sort of how to go about it, on something so important, really doesn't make sense. We'll often say to students that actually you need to see this admissions test as another A-level. Firstly, in terms of how important it is. Secondly, in terms of how serious you should take it, and how much time you should be putting into it. We can say relatively happily that, particularly if you're studying PPE, the test matters a hell of a lot. So you should be spending time on that. And like James was saying, this really helps you make sure that you're spending your time on the areas that need it most. So actually, if you have 1 hour to spare in any given week to spend on your application, you probably are better off spending it on the test or preparing for the interviews than you are on the personal statement, because we know that will have a bigger impact overall on your chances. Okay, so that's a broad understanding of you know, what they're going to be taking into consideration. James, absolutely right in saying it does vary a bit from subject to subject. So the more STEM-based subjects might care even less about the personal statement, and might care a bit more about the admissions test. Or, you know, humanities one, or maybe there's one, maybe you want to be an architect at Cambridge, then obviously they're going to take into account more your portfolio and things like that. But absolutely, as a rule of thumb, it works really well. So let's look into the admission statistics for a few different subjects. Obviously, this is something that you can do on your own and something that you can find on the Oxford and Cambridge websites. But actually, a lot of students won't take the time to do that. And you might not necessarily think to do that. But it's worth having in the back of your mind, even if it doesn't make a huge influence on your decision making, it's certainly worth knowing. And there are a few things which do vary relatively reliably between different subjects across the years. So there are certain subjects like classics or medicine, in which actually, on average, the GCSE profile is really, really strong. Whereas in others, like law is the example given here, you can get away with dropping a few marks, and you know, more of your competition will be doing that. So when we're talking about that first chunk, that blue chunk of grades, that also needs to be mediated by, you know, what is going on amongst the other people that you're competing with. So here we have some an example of natural sciences. Natural sciences, obviously a very, very competitive subject. Lots of incredibly bright students going for that. And unsurprisingly, their GCSE profiles are pretty strong. And the difference, just to be really clear here, an average applicant is just someone who's made an application. An average offer holder is someone who has actually, you know, gone through the application process, come out of it at the other end, you know, at the end of December, and has received an offer to study at Cambridge in January. And you can see that there's a little difference there, and relatively consistently, you'll see that actually there seems to be a bit of a relationship between having slightly higher GCSEs and getting an offer. One key thing to remember, though, is that this is an average. So whilst the average offer holder has 8 A stars for engineering at Cambridge, if you have 7 A stars, that doesn't mean that you're then just going to be completely disregarded, because there will be people there with 7 A stars, there will be people there with 6 A stars and 5 A stars. But the further away you get from that average, the harder you are making things for yourself. And here we have medicine as one of the examples I gave earlier, of people who have pretty good GCSE profiles. And given it's a very competitive subject, this shouldn't be hopefully surprising. And here we have law. You know, it's still law at Cambridge. It's still, you know, students are still doing well. But you can see that overall, if we compare the average GCSE profile of a medic at Cambridge and a lawyer at Cambridge, the lawyer at Cambridge, there's more scope there for you to have slightly lower GCSEs. So if you're sat there thinking, you know, I've got 7 A stars, and I've heard that, you know, there are people at Cambridge who have 10 A stars, and I'm very, very worried, but you're applying for law, actually, you're sort of just about on par with other people applying for law who have actually gotten offers. Obviously, it's really dependent on you doing well in the other parts of the application. That goes without saying, but it's just something to be, well, to bear in mind effectively. Okay. And this pattern isn't always very predictable. So again, you might expect maths to be a very sort of academic one where all of the students have flawless GCSEs. And that's not necessarily the case. What does seem to be very important still is obviously at Cambridge, they're very keen on the STEP. They want their students to be doing very well in that paper as well. So there are differences in GCSE profile across the different subjects. It's really worth bearing that in mind for you as an individual for your application. You know, we talked about a few different subjects, but have a look into how things look for your subject, and you'll be able to get a sense for how you compare. As I've said already, those GCSEs are an average. So if you are lower, that doesn't mean that you should just give up. That doesn't mean you should think I have no chance, but you should be thinking, I am below average. That means I need to be above average in the other parts of the application. Competitiveness is also something it's worth taking into account, of course. And it doesn't necessarily follow the GCSEs. So one example that we give of this is classics, which broadly speaking, yeah, the average GCSEs is about 9 A stars. But the overall acceptance rate is about 40 to 50% across Oxford and Cambridge. So just because the GCSEs are high doesn't necessarily mean that the competitiveness follows directly. It often does, but it doesn't necessarily mean so. And it's worth looking really into the specifics of your course. So here we've picked out biochemistry and chemistry. Now, lots of people might be quite interested in biochemistry and they might think it sounds like a really good idea, but it's really worth looking into the course in a lot of detail. Because actually, if it just sounds like a good idea, but the course itself isn't something that you're that interested in, or isn't necessarily that much better than what they offer in the chemistry course, then you might actually be making things more difficult for yourself without any real benefits. Now, if you look at the biochemistry course and you know, actually, this is exactly what I want to be studying, the first year sounds amazing, second year sounds great, third year sounds even better. These are all the different kind of things that I found interesting so far. This is what I want to be doing. Then, of course, it's worth going for that more competitive course. But if that's not the feeling you're getting, then actually you need to question, why do you want to do it? And if you don't really want to do it, then is there another subject which is just as good, just as along the lines of what you want to be doing, but actually you're giving yourself a slightly less hard time in the application process. There's a huge difference between Oxford and Cambridge for medicine in terms of the acceptance rate, and that's because Cambridge has far more places for Oxford. It does vary year on year, but typically they both have about the same number of applicants, but Oxford has much less space on their medical course. If you've got a very good reason for wanting to study at Oxford, then absolutely follow that. But actually, if it means nothing to you, if Oxford or Cambridge, the courses look pretty similar, they would both be very appealing to you, you'd like to study at either, then it's more sensible to apply to Cambridge. And that's, of course, something that's worth keeping in mind. James, what is the other difference between Oxford and Cambridge that's worth keeping in mind, particularly for the competitive courses?
You've thrown me a curveball, Will. What do you mean? Give me more
I'm
context.
talking about their interview rates.
Okay, yes. So Cambridge typically will interview significantly higher numbers of applicants than Oxford. So that's something to bear in mind. I mean, for some courses, it's up to about 90% of applicants will be interviewed at Cambridge. Whereas, for certain courses at Oxford, I'm thinking sort of E&M, for example, they only interview about 30% of applicants. So you are more likely to get through to the interview stage at Cambridge. Doesn't necessarily make it an easier application, but if you feel that you're really going to excel in that part of the application, that's something to potentially bear in mind as well.
Yeah, and particularly, as James says, if you think you're going to excel in that part, but also if you're a little bit worried that you're slightly below average for the other parts, if your GCSEs are a little lower, you can get away with being average or below average at Cambridge because they're going to interview sort of 80%, 90% of you. You can even be sort of bottom 25% and still get an interview and try and turn things around. Obviously, you're not making things easy for yourself. You have to have a very strong interview to sort of redeem that, but you have that possibility. All right, so naturally, we've talked a bit about all the different parts of the application process, but I wanted to take a bit of time to put some figures behind why we care about the admissions test so much. I mean, we care about the admissions test so much because they care about the admissions test. But obviously, it's very easy for someone to just say that, but it's easier for a student to self-motivate. Why am I putting myself through doing these practice papers, doing this extra work? Well, hopefully, it should be pretty clear. So most people will have to sit an admissions test of some kind. It's some people will say to me, I don't know if you've had this before, James, is, they've picked a subject because it doesn't have an admissions test, so they can sort of get away without doing it. But on the flip side, equally, I'll have students that say, actually, I'd much rather have an admissions test because then I've got the opportunity to sort of impress further. I know that everyone from my course has really good GCSEs. I know that's the case. I know that that's not actually going to set me aside that much. I want to do a test to put me in a good position.
But particularly if you do have lower grades.
Yeah.
I think the tests exist as a tool for the universities to much more effectively differentiate between all of those very sort of highly academic students. The saying goes, you can't be first in your GCSEs, but you can be first in the BMAT, for example. So it is actually a more efficient way for the universities to go about sort of selecting between different candidates.
Yeah, and as you guys will see, or as we'll go through, being first in your admissions test seems to make a very, very big difference. So yeah, it's just the last 2 points here, just for those that don't know. The Oxford admissions test, well, all of the Oxford tests pretty much, as well as a number of the Cambridge ones, are sat this year, right at the start of November. There are some Cambridge tests that are sat sort of closer to the interview, or often it was sat on the day of the interview, as they're doing virtual interviews. I think, or at least what they did last year was they did it a few days before. The CLT, the Cambridge Law Test, is a really good example. But here we have the distribution of PAT scores. So the PAT is the physics aptitude test. It's sat by applicants for engineering and for physics at Oxford. In blue, we can see all candidate scores, and obviously that encompasses orange and black. In orange, you can see the scores of all the people who were shortlisted for interview but didn't receive an offer, and their scores, of course. And then in black, you can see all the people who received offers. Now, what should be quite striking to you as to the students out there watching this is actually, if you are scoring around 70 in your admissions test, you're going to get an offer. Sorry, you're going to get an interview. Okay, that's a pretty powerful thing to be able to say. If I get this mark on this test, I will get an interview. Now, of course, it varies. The sort of the average grades and things like that do vary a bit year on year, but that somewhere there's a threshold. They don't specify, but somewhere there is a threshold. And actually, it looks like it's sort of around the 67, 68 mark. So if it was me, and I was going through all this again, I would think, well, that's where I should be spending my time, because I know Oxford, as James said, they don't interview everyone. So I've got to make sure I get to interview at least. Now, if we're thinking even harder about this, we know that if you're sort of in the top 5% of test performance, so these people near the very far right-hand side, almost all of them actually have an offer. So if you get 87 and above, all but, from the looks of things, one of you, or one or two of you, will not only get interviews, but you'll actually get an offer. Now, that is also a pretty powerful thing. And you'll see, actually, if you're sort of more around the average, if you have just an average run-of-the-mill PAT score for your year, you've got a really, really low chance of getting an interview, let alone getting an offer. Really, really low. You might have seen, there's this spike right on the left-hand side. That'll be students whose schools forgot to register them, or they weren't able to take the test, but only a tiny, tiny number of them were still given an interview. But you might be sat there thinking, well, that's all well and good for the physicists and the engineers. They know what they should be doing, but what about me? What about my test? But actually what we find is this is quite a robust, well, it's a very robust thing across all subjects. So similarly, the score distribution has been color-coded in a similar way, except in the black this time. These are all the people who applied, sat the test, got this score, and then didn't get any further. So this is for mathematicians at Oxford. The white, they were asked to interview, but got no further. And then in the gray, in this bottom right-hand corner, they were asked to interview and given an offer. And again, you can see if you're scoring in this 51 to 55 brackets, you've got what looks like sort of about a 5% chance of getting, getting an interview, and a negligible chance of getting an offer. Whereas if you're only up, so if you sort of only go up a few of these bars, and obviously that represents sort of 20 marks, but still it's a few bins upwards here, the 66 to 70 mark. Actually, you've got a 50% chance of getting an interview. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And maybe a, 5% chance of getting an offer. Boost your mark by another 20, and you've got a 50% chance of, up to this 86 to 90 boundary, and you've got a chance of actually 50% chance of getting an offer and 100% chance of getting an interview. That is enormous. That is huge. And that is an enormous effect. And again, that is in your control right now. We've got a few months before the test. And so you've got the opportunity to really make that difference. And of course, at this high end, the top scorers, they're obviously candidates which Oxford are very, very interested in. But you might be thinking, that's all great for the maths, the engineers, the STEM people, but maybe it's not so relevant for the humanities. And so this is taken from the TSA. This is the problem solving part of the first section. The TSA, for those that don't know, is a thinking skills assessment. It's sat by quite a few different people. So PPE, economics and management, experimental psychology, psychology, philosophy and linguistics, geography nowadays sitting it, land economy at Cambridge sit it. So quite a few different subjects will be needed to do. I think human sciences as well. There's a few others. And these are, not STEM, well, not as hardcore STEM subjects as maths and engineering. But of course, you can see that their test still matters. Again, if we look at the sort of the modal score, the modal bin is 60 to 64.99, you've got a pretty low chance of getting asked to interview and a very low chance of being offered a place. You should by now have worked out what these different colors mean. Each time it's sort of the same kind of pattern. And if we shift that score up, if we look at this 75 to 79.99 bin, it's a completely different story. Sort of 30–40% chance of getting an offer, 90% chance of getting an interview. That's a big difference, and certainly something to be paying attention to. And of course, the critical thinking is similar. So we see this pattern across a huge number of tests. We're not going to go through every single one, but hopefully you guys are getting a sense of the importance of the test. If you haven't, then I have not been expressing it emphatically enough, because it is so important. And again, very often what I see, particularly at schools, is they will spend a lot of time on the personal statement. They'll spend lots of time worrying about that, and they don't really spend that much time worrying about the test. I would very much like, if that is how you've seen things so far, I would very much like you to reverse your thinking and actually spend a lot more time on the test. Because ultimately, this is something, as with anything, the more work you put into it, the better you will be. I'm sure none of you would have gotten A stars in your GCSEs if you sat them right at the start of the GCSE learning process. But obviously, you spent 2 years working away at it with your teachers, and at the end, you achieved great grades. Equally with something like this, there will be maybe 1 or 2 people who can swan into it and get a top grade. But actually, for most people, anything like a GCSE, an A-level, an admissions test, it takes work. And you need to apply your intelligence and your ability and curiosity to this in order to be able to do as well as you possibly can in it. Okay, so that's quite a lot of me harping on about admissions tests. I'm sure you are all not going to be running straight into doing an admissions test practice, because you've probably heard enough of it, but give yourself a day's break and then hop into it. Naturally, when you're thinking about, particularly for students that maybe don't feel like they would be the right kind of candidate for Oxford or Cambridge, it's worth bearing in mind, like we've said, a lot of the decision is yet to come. A lot of the things that they're going to be measuring you on can be worked on. If you put effort into it, you can get results from it. And ultimately, there will be lots of people who have better grades than you, but don't put in the effort. They don't put in the work on the tests. They don't bother with trying too hard for the interview. They sort of rustle up a personal statement a few days before the deadline. Those are the people who won't get offers. Okay, we see it very, very consistently. The people who are quite blasé about it don't get offers, and regularly we see students who do have lower GCSEs who are getting offers because of the work we put in. One of the fun bits of feedback that I get from students is when they say, "I'm really surprised I got an offer," because there are students in my class with better grades than me. And ultimately, it's just the case that, well, they weren't working hard enough. They weren't putting in the effort that you were putting in. For those of you that don't know too much about UniAdmissions, and there will be some of you, we are effectively a prep school for, for the very competitive universities, or that's at least how we see ourselves. And naturally, there are lots of different ways to prepare for an application, but we have a way that we help our students prepare. And I'm going to let James sort of take you through how that all works. Naturally, this isn't for everyone. So, there will be lots of people who have their own approach to it, but this is just what we've found works over the years. And if, you think actually some of it sounds like it might be helpful for you, or you think actually you just have more questions that we're not able to answer in the Q&A, then, do have a chat with us. We'll be able to give you more specific to you advice about anything to do with your application. Okay, James, take it away.
Sure. So, actually, I just wanted to preempt a question that we get quite a lot on these sort of open days, which is sort of relevant to what we're going to talk about in a moment. But oftentimes people ask, when is the best time to start their preparation for this kind of thing? And as we've seen with that sort of test data, a difference of 4 or 5 marks in a test can give you 20 sort of 25% higher chance of getting through to an interview. So we know that when you're preparing for something like a test, it's about making those kind of incremental improvements. And I think the longer that you have, the more of those incremental improvements that you can make. So realistically, the best time to start is sort of now, really. And that could be at any stage that you are in your kind of application, I think. So yes, that just reminded me to tell you all that before the Q&A.
Here's a really good, so the 75 to 79 and 80 to 84 bin is a really good example of what James is saying. Obviously, things are looking quite good in the 75 to 79 bin, but actually if you look at it, you've got about a 30% chance of getting an offer, whereas just in the next bin, you've got basically a 50% chance of getting an offer. That's a huge difference for just a couple of marks.
Perfect. Yeah, so as Will's saying, we are a prep school. We have programs of support for students. Typically, there is sort of different, we call them pillars of support. So the first of which is one-to-one tuition. So students who work with us are working with, one-on-one with a tutor. The idea here really being to identify where your own individual strengths and weaknesses are in your application, and then to go about quite systematically improving those. So, working with your tutor will be somebody who has studied the same subjects as you at, typically Oxford or Cambridge. So somebody who's been through the same experience, and being successful in that. In terms of test score, actually, as a benchmark, our tutors all achieved in the top 10% of their admissions tests. So yeah, the first part of the program is one-to-one tuition.
We've actually got a bit of a, well, this is some feedback from a tutorial. I think it's from one of a mock interview, actually. But the point of this is, so at the end of each tutorial, we send the tutor will write a report about, what's been covered, what areas need work on, those kind of things. And this is obviously for the student to review, and for this also gets sent out to the parents, because as a parent, it's difficult to know what your child should be doing. And I think it's quite tricky not being kept in the loop. And sometimes, I'm not saying anyone here, but sometimes teenagers can't be the best at communicating what's going on with mum and dad. Sometimes mum and dad don't get a really full picture. And so that's why we found it's quite helpful to send these through. And naturally, so one of the things that James will talk about in a minute is the materials, but having these reports means that students can always be looking into, okay, where do I need to be working on? What things can I be doing outside of those tutorials? That's quite important. Which brings us on to, the resources.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a second part of a program. Students will have materials and resources to help them prepare. So we have hard copy textbooks, quite a lot of sort of very popular hard copy textbooks, actually. but also our online preparation portal. And that's really the hub of a program for a student. It's where we have the reading lists, it's where we have preparation materials for the tests, for the personal statement, the interview. And I think we're going to see a little bit more about the portal in a second. But the idea of this is that you work with a tutor. Okay, so you identify where those strengths and weaknesses are, you're having that input, and then your tutor is setting you work to do between each session using all of these materials and resources. So the benefit of this really is the consistency of that engagement, so that you're preparing consistently, but also for you to have an understanding of where to focus your energy as well. This process can be very overwhelming, but actually understanding where to focus your energy and to do that in a systematic way, I think is really important part of that. So that's how the two are sort of linked together, really.
Yeah, and here we have that video that James was talking about. It's just sort of taking you through how it looks for our students. This is our preparation portal. You know, it's helpful to have lots of different kinds of resources for students to use. So ultimately, one of the first things is to actually work through content. Now, a lot of this will be stuff that you've done at school. Some of it will be perhaps that you're going to cover at school, and making sure you've got a really solid grasp of everything is important. Next step, of course, is to go through a lot of practice. And I mean a lot of practice. You know, having a tutor isn't a substitute for working hard. You still need to put in lots of hours doing lots and lots of practice questions and working through examples, so that you know that you can walk into that test knowing that actually you've done pretty much every kind of question they could throw at you. You've been through it. It's just a matter of applying yourself. And then once you've done that enough times, it's time to actually see, can I do this for 1.5, 2 hours, 2.25 hours straight? You know, it's very different to be able to do a set of practice questions for 20 minutes compared to doing it as like an endurance sport, sort of. You know, sprinting is very different to running a 10K. And so that's why doing practice papers is such a useful thing. And you'll have done practice papers for your GCSEs. I'm sure you've done practice papers to do, you know, at school, things like that. It's a pretty tried and tested method of improving on something. Anything to add about the materials, James?
Well, I would say actually that the reality of most of these admissions tests actually are that if you had an unlimited amount of time in which to do them, I'm pretty sure that the scores would sort of increase by you know, a phenomenal amount. It's actually the skill of test taking itself, which is also something that's part of this. So absolutely, you've got to be doing practice. You absolutely have to be doing timed practice, but also understanding a lot of the techniques and strategies around test taking itself and within your particular test. I think that's a really important part of this as well. And that's something that we sort of focus on within all of this.
Yeah, brilliant. And then that brings us on to enrichment seminars.
Yeah, so I mean, these take place every Sunday, and here we're sort of replicating, you know, as best we can, you know, a sort of Oxford style tutorial or a Cambridge style supervision. So that's sort of small group learning. So we have a number of different streams depending on your subject. So for example, we have a medicine stream, and every week we look at a different topic within medicine as an example. Okay, so the idea is that over the months that you're on a program, you sort of broaden your sort of knowledge of these different topics. There's a handout which introduces the topic each week. You come along to the seminar. They're live, so they're very interactive. You know, there's lots of debate and discussion. And the benefit here really is, you know, to help you develop where your interests are within your subject. And when you interview, you're more able to sort of confidently articulate your interests within your subject. And you're able to link that to things that you've been reading and engaging with. So these are sort of live seminars every Sunday. As I say, you know, there are different streams depending on your subject.
I think tomorrow the medics are doing a seminar on emergency medicine, which is actually a topic which a lot of medics feel like they know a lot about because they've watched plenty of 24 hours in A&E or something along those lines, but that they won't have sort of approached it like from an academic perspective, or really properly discussed it, that they'll have seen a lot of reality or scripted TV about it, but actually having that proper experience is really important. And as James says, there's a number of different topics. The medicine one sticks to mind, but I can't remember for the life of me what the others are discussing.
So I think a lot of these are quite topical, actually. So I believe, I don't know if I'm supposed to be, nobody's told me off yet for doing this, but sometimes I like to have a little look at the more interesting ones.
Yeah.
So I know that the STEM guys are going to be looking at artificial intelligence and COVID-19 tomorrow. Okay. So there are a lot of sort of quite topical issues that, probably going to be referenced in your interview as well.
Are you going along to that one as well, James?
I mean, unless you tell me I can't.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I think I might pop in. They are quite interesting, I must say.
And we've got a little clip here actually from our medical seminar leads last year. That the girl on the left is a girl from Cambridge, chap on the right from Newcastle. I think this is from one of the very first enrichment seminars where they're actually sort of explaining what the whole point of them was. And sometimes I think it's just helpful for people to hear from the from the people giving the seminar what it's all there for. Let's see it. Do let me know, James, if you can't hear anything, but I think I've sorted it.
So the aims of these whole enrichments are supposed to be 24. It's supposed to guide you throughout your application with your wider reading. So everyone knows that you have to do wider reading to support your medical application, to sort of demonstrate that you have an insight into medicine. But the other thing that these enrichment supervisions will do is supposed to help you increase your confidence in discussing these different aspects of your wider reading, because that's what you're going to be asked to do at interview. So I think the best place to start building up your confidence is probably on here and talking in this group. And hopefully throughout all of the wider reading that we'll be doing with you, you'll be feeling a bit more prepared for life as a medical student and as a doctor as well.
Okay, awesome. And then the very last part of our program is our day courses.
Yeah, so we have these day courses for the different parts of an application. So typically, the personal statement, the admissions test, the interview. And the aim really here is you'll be kind of working in small groups, with a tutor, consolidating a lot of the work that you've been doing, over the sort of months that you've been on the program. So the idea really is to make sure everything's where it needs to be for you, and give you that sort of final push into the different stages of this application. You also get the opportunity to sort of work collaboratively with your peers and sort of a bit of cross collaboration. And they're just serve as a really nice sort of bookend to the different parts of the application too. Would you have anything to add there, Will?
Yeah, not really. You're absolutely right. It's naturally our students are working away on things consistently, each week, putting a bit of time into this. And yeah, it's helpful to have something to basically say, this is, I am ready. I've put everything together. I've reviewed everything one last time. This is it. We're ready to give this a good go. And ultimately, that's those are the four key parts, as James said. They all sort of integrate with each other and work alongside each other very well. And the point of we don't make our students do all this work for nothing. The point of it is, at the end of it, you are preparing in all the right ways for all the right things, and you stand a good chance of getting an offer from the university that you're wanting to apply to. Naturally, if they care a lot about the test and they care a lot about the interviews and they care a little bit about the personal statements, if you're doing as well as you possibly can across those different things, then you're going to be a stronger candidate from their perspective. So we do find that our students can do pretty well in comparison to how the overall competitiveness of the field. And if you compare that sort of how well various sort of independent schools do, or some of the top schools sending students to Oxford or Cambridge, some of these schools you'd hear the name and you'd think pretty much everyone who applies from there will get into Oxford or Cambridge because they just have that reputation. But actually, you'll see, a lot of, I think Westminster is the sort of top one in this list, and they're still, but 50% of their students will get offers, but 50% of their students will get rejected. You know, there's a lot of competition at Oxford or Cambridge, and even very, very good schools will still have a number of students that end up not getting the offers that they're looking for. And ultimately what we do each year is we try and improve. So we try and make as many of our students get their offers. And that may mean more work, but usually our students are grateful for it because of what they achieve at the end of it. Like I've been saying, you know, it does take work. You know, we speak to lots of students who we can tell relatively early on, relatively quickly, that they're not too interested in sort of spending their weekends learning about their subject. They're not too interested in actually doing any practice interviews or anything along those lines. They like the idea of going to Oxford or Cambridge. You know, it sounds very nice, but when it comes to actually putting in the effort, you know, backing that up with hard work, they're slightly less inclined. And you know, typically we won't offer them at that point. You know, we only want to be taking on students that we know our program plus their effort is going to equal a very, very strong chance of getting an offer. And if James or I or one of the rest of the team aren't convinced of that, it's likely that we won't be making a recommendation. And we normally in those circumstances just leave students with advice. You know, we're not too keen on working with you, but if you are going to do this, you need to change up. And as soon as possible, really, you need to buck up your attitude, basically. Anything to add? Any students that you've had to reject, James?
I mean, you know, unfortunately it does happen. I think ultimately attitudes to a certain extent will always trump, you know, sort of the academics, in the sense that, you know, if you're starting at the same point as somebody else with flawless academics, but you don't put the same amount of effort into preparation for the tests and the interview, you know, you're not putting yourself in a good position to get an offer. So we're really interested in students who are really sort of motivated to study their subjects of choice and really willing to engage with this kind of program, because we know there's a lot of structure here. There's a lot of input from our side. There is an emphasis, though, on students to be working hard too. You know, this isn't a hand-holding process. There's you know, there's an expectation for you to work hard, and that sort of combination, as you've seen from the success rates, normally yields pretty strong results. Yeah,
absolutely. And the student honor code is just sort of a short thing that students read and sort of go through when they join. And it basically just, like James says, we expect you to sort of uphold your end of the bargain. You know, we expect you to turn up to tutorials as a minimum. We expect you, when your tutor says, look, you need to work on this before next time, we expect you to have done that. And obviously, you know, we're very flexible. Sometimes students will have lots of stuff going on at school, or they've got a week internship somewhere and they're not able to do it. But it's all about being responsible for yourself and for your work. Because in that scenario, you just say to your tutor, look, I haven't had time. Can we push our tutorial back a few days so I can do everything? And so, yeah, we really do expect our students to be responsible, to be mature about this, and to take this seriously. Now's the time where we ask you all to leave reviews if you have the time. You know, it's some people will have lots of experience with us. You know, they'll be in a full program and they'll be working with us for a year, 2 years, however long, a couple of months, and they'll leave a review. Some people will, you know, only have had a very brief conversation with us, or maybe, you know, they've just come along to an open day. Whatever the degree of your interaction with us, let us know what it's like. If this was rubbish and not very informative, then we need to know, because we need to stop doing it. If it was helpful, but there were other things that we could be covering, then we need to know, because then we can cover it, and then that will help you with your application. So please do, you know, take some time at some point. If you have time, I appreciate everyone's very busy these days, and let us know how we're doing. And again, that can be, you know, just after a 5-minute conversation, or after full consultation, full program, or whatever, really. James, can you explain what the cooling off period is? Because I think there will be some people thinking, well, it all sounds good, but what if it doesn't work in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, ultimately, you know, we want this to work too. So we want students on programs that are good fits for them. So we have a cooling off period, and it's essentially an opportunity for us to make sure that the student is a good fit for the program and they're sort of doing what they need to do and engaging in the right way. But of course, it's an opportunity for the student and parents to really get a good sense and make sure that the program is a good fit for them.
Mm.
So typically in the cooling off period, you'd be able to sort of have some sessions with your tutor, have access to the materials and resources, come along to some of those seminars, to get a really, really clear sense of everything. And whilst it very rarely happens, what we're saying here is if it isn't a good fit for you, you do have the opportunity to withdraw. Yeah. And although we'd love to have a chat with you and sort of find out a little bit more about why that is, you can withdraw and you would receive a full refund.
Yeah, ultimately, we've got a process that we think works quite well. James and I would think that we do a pretty good job of working out if the program's right or not for someone, but sadly, we're not perfect. And if you do start and it's not quite what you needed or what you were hoping for, then of course we don't want you stuck in something which isn't actually helping you. Ultimately, our long-term goal is to get all of our students in, and that doesn't help if some of our students, like, just categorically the program isn't right for them. I do want to talk a bit about the foundation, because we appreciate having as many applications as we can for the foundation. Some of you might be wondering, you might be thinking, this sounds quite helpful, this sounds quite good, but what if it's something that I can't afford? Well, the short answer is if it isn't something that you can afford, then it's likely that we'll be able to help you with that. So 93 students that we supported last year, we supported for free. And the plan is to try and support 250 students for free this year. I hope we're getting close to that number, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. Ultimately, we want to try and make sure that if students are good and strong and academic and have good potential, then the finances isn't something that has to hold them back effectively. If you want to have a look into this in any more detail, go to it's uniadmissions.co.uk/foundation. If you think you might be eligible, or maybe someone might be eligible, but they don't know about this kind of thing, do get them to apply, and hopefully we'll be able to help them out. And then the final thing is to plug my podcast that I do with Rohan. This is something that we've not been able to do very recently. We've made several episodes, but over the last few weeks we've had to put it on hold because of we've just become very busy with all the work at UniAdmissions. But obviously we've talked about a topic relevant to Oxbridge today. Rohan and I also spend a fair bit of time talking about various university related topics in this podcast. So there will be stuff there that's helpful and relevant for people, listening today. We also talk about other stuff. We're both sort of quite keen scientists, so we will often talk about things that we find interesting. And so hopefully, if that's something that you find interesting, then this is something which you can get involved with as well. Bit of a shameless plug, but you can't blame me for trying. And that brings us to the end. So that'll be the thing that you remember. You'll remember the podcast and you remember how much you want to listen to it. What we've got going on in the background is a little animation showing you how you can, if you do want to chat with us, how you can book an appointment. I think we're sort of relatively busy with, pretty much all the time, but do fit in a slot where, you'd like to speak with us. Let us know what it's all about. The more information you put in here, the better we can do in this consultation, and the more relevant it can be for you. And while that's running, James and I will work through our list of questions. So we've got quite a fair few here. Please do carry on sending more through. Someone's asked if they will be sent a recording. So normally the recordings are sent through sort of 2 or 3 days later. So hopefully Monday or Tuesday you'll have you'll have that sent to you by email. Okay. And James, if there are any questions that you like the look of, please do jump across and sort of go through them. Sure. I'm going to go through this one. So if we have an additional set of qualifications such as APs, and while we meet the standard of 5 out of 5 in 3 subjects, we get 4 in a couple of others, does that hurt our chances? alternatively something like getting AAB in a course requiring AAA. So this is someone who's asking, someone presumably in the US, or maybe in a US international school, asking about if you have more grades than the required. Ultimately, actually, so for the APs in particular, they're not, once you've got that certain set, you're sort of fine, and they're not going to sort of penalize you. It's not like they'd swap it. Obviously, you need 5 out of 5 in a few subjects. They're not going to swap in one of those 4 out of 5s in and then say, oh well, you didn't meet the minimum entry requirements. But of course, you are still being considered in relation to everyone else. So naturally, if you've got 3 A stars at A level, and the person next to you has 3 A stars and a B, you're probably going to look like a stronger candidate, because actually you've done at the best you possibly could with the stuff that you had, whereas they have obviously, they've taken on more, but they've struggled and they've lost marks as a result. So, you know, a lot of people are interested in taking a 4th A level, but it's not necessarily a benefit, particularly if it takes away your time in the week from other areas. So if it means you're spending less time on other things, less time on the test, it's not necessarily worth doing it. So it's not going to mean that you no longer meet their minimum entry requirements, but it might have an impact on your competitiveness. And I know in the States, obviously we know a lot about the UK and sort of A levels IB. In the States, I think you can sort of take as many APs as you want. And I normally, when I'm speaking with students from America, have a pretty candid conversation about, well, you know, you can take as many as you want, and obviously you've got applications elsewhere where that makes a difference, but we shouldn't be taking on more than you can manage. James, you got something that you want to?
Yeah, so somebody's asking here, when are the admissions tests? Well, I think, you know, there are so many of them. Generally, they sort of happen on the 3rd or 4th of November, typically. There are some that happen on the day of interview at Cambridge. And for other subjects like law and medicine, there's some various dates. So really just have a look at the course page on Oxford or Cambridge's website.
Yeah.
They'll give you a very clear understanding of all of that sort of information, really.
Yeah. It's worth knowing generally some of the information that we present. Oh, sorry, James. Some of the information that we present here is sort of quite tricky to find, but some of it is very easy to Google. So things like test dates, if you just Google LNAT test date, you'll find what you're looking for. If you Google PAT, you know, test score distribution, might take you a little longer, but you'll probably get there eventually. But yeah, there's lots of stuff that you can Google and get.
I just sort of noticed another one here then. So I think this might be relevant in a way for a lot of people here. So it's says, I'm a student in Scotland. You also provide tutoring which is suitable for the Scottish curriculum. So what I think you might mean there is the differences between sort of the UK and the Scottish curriculum and also international curriculums. So we work with a lot of students from a lot of different countries, got a pretty good understanding of the differences between, you know, sort of school curriculums. What we tend to do at the beginning of a course, a program actually is sort of, particularly for the admissions test, we have academies which break down the specification of an admissions test. And what we really like you guys to do is actually traffic light those areas of the specification that you feel more or less comfortable with. And that informs where we're going to sort of put our, sort of have our input. What's the verb for input? Do our input, have our input within this process for you. Yeah. So yeah, we work with a lot of students from a lot of different countries.
Yeah.
I think, you know, for a lot of the STEM subjects, you know, even for, you know, students on the British curriculum, there's going to be areas of sort of maths, for example, that won't be covered until, you know, year 13 typically. So there are a lot of nuances between different subjects and different curriculums, but don't worry, we have you covered.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions. So there's someone, Heshat has asked about someone who's interested in medicine, and sort of asking if it's worth starting your preparation for year 10 or 11. and someone else has said, they're in year 11 and they're interested in economics, is there something you can be doing, they can be doing right now? Ultimately, I was going to say the short answer is, but actually there isn't really a short answer for this. The long answer is that it will depend a bit on you. So the short answer, actually, I'm going to come back and negate what I just said. The short answer is chat with us, because that's going to be the easiest way for us to work out what you should be doing right now. Now, we do have programs that we've designed for younger students to help them develop academic skills, help them develop their wider reading, help them, start doing research projects and things like that from an early stage when you have spare time. But these aren't necessarily right for everyone. I've spoken with students who actually, from speaking with them and speaking with their parents, I've said, actually, I'm not sure they're quite mature enough. I'm not quite sure they're ready for something like this. I think perhaps we need to wait a bit until, I'm confident that this is something that they can take on. So it might be that I say, actually, or I or James or one of the team say, all sounds good, but let's put a pin in this for a year. Or it might be that we say, actually, yeah, there's loads of stuff that we can be doing right now. Let's get cracking. Let's make the most of this extra time. It's not too early to start preparing for anything, but what we normally do with our younger students, I think Heshant, you were asking about, starting preparation for that admissions test. If we do take on a student in year 10, they don't start doing a weekly admissions test practice paper from then. It's more about developing academic Oxbridge related skills and techniques and talents, which take time. These things aren't things that you can just switch on and off. It takes time to develop that. And then once you've developed that over a couple of years, then applying that to the test, the interview, the personal statement. So that's often how we approach things. Sanjeet has asked about open applications. This is a question I always like to answer, or like to receive, because lots of people ask it, and lots of people don't really know whether to do an open application, whether to choose a college. One thing that I will say, Sanjeet, is that what we do see is people who have made open applications have a significantly lower acceptance rate. Now, that is a correlation. So it could just be that poorer applicants, as in, worse applicants, are more likely to make an open application. Could also be that less engaged applicants are more likely to make an open application. If they're not bothered enough to sort of research the colleges and pick one that they like, then they might just be less engaged generally with the overall application process and put that less effort into it. So those could be two sort of extraneous variables. There could be a causational factor of Oxford says, look, you couldn't even be bothered to pick a college. We can sort of see you're not that interested. And that actually has an active effect on the application. Or it could just be a passive correlation that we've noticed. Either way, I wouldn't take that risk. So I would choose a college. And obviously they have a relatively sophisticated pooling system, such that if you do choose a college which by chance is just oversubscribed in a particular year, that should have a negligible effect on your application as a whole. Okay.
I should just add there, actually. So I think from speaking to, as you can imagine, lots and lots of students, choosing a college is actually something that kind of fills students with dread and is actually quite an overwhelming thing. So I would say that as part of the program, we do actually have a day specifically to help you make a more informed decision about which college that you will apply to at Oxford or Cambridge. And that is something that's involved in this process as well, helping you make the choices of your universities, whether that be 4 or 5, depending on the subject, and also which college you're going to apply to as well, because we appreciate these are all sort of important and sometimes quite stressful things that you need to navigate in this journey.
I was quite flippant in saying, just choose one. And as James says, it is a large cause of anxiety for a lot of students. If it helps at all, from my experience when I applied, I basically just ran around an open day and picked the one that I thought was the prettiest. And that was it. That was nothing that much more intelligent went into. Obviously, they had to do my, provide my subject, but it wasn't a sort of a hugely mathematical decision. But whatever reason you pick your college, you know, whatever matters to you, this is always something which, as James says, we've got provisions for in the program, always something you can discuss with people who have been through that process already, and that's helpful. Manal has asked, will Oxford be reducing the number of international students being admitted to medicine this year, considering that the past year noted a surge in medical applicants and multiple universities are requesting students to defer? So I don't know how much you know about the rules for international students. And actually, I don't know if these rules have been breached. I imagine, well, I don't think they're allowed to be breached. But the General Medical Council will put a limit on the number of spots that a university can give in their medical course to international students. For Oxford, that number is 14. So they can't take on 15. Even if their 15th strongest international medic is better than all the UK-based, home-based medics, they can't take them on, they're not allowed. So actually, it's already pretty reduced. I'd be surprised if they purposely, you know, if Oxford had their way, they'd accept a lot more because there are obviously lots of talented international people. But I would be surprised if they took on less than 14. I know lots of people, lots of universities are asking medical students to defer. I don't actually, really interesting, I haven't paid too much attention specifically to internationals. I imagine the medical schools are still bound by the GMC restrictions. So we'll see, but they probably wouldn't have overpromised offers as much as they do for the home students. Sally has asked, when is the admissions test, what subjects is it in, and how many tests? Is that the one that you were referring to earlier, James?
Yeah, so just, you know, I would just, you know, it's going to be important for you to be as well informed as possible anyway. So do have a look at the course page on Oxford or Cambridge's website. You know, they really do have a lot of kind of useful information there.
Broadly speaking, everyone only sits, oh no, that's not even broadly speaking. So the medics will often sit 2 tests. Most non-medicine Oxford and Cambridge applicants will only sit 1. I can think of one example, computer science at Cambridge, where everyone sits the CTMUA or TMUA, and then certain colleges can also ask you to sit the CSAT, which is another computer science test. So roughly speaking, non-medicine Oxbridge, just 1 test, except for computer science.
Oh, and that is actually, maybe we're digressing a little bit, but that is another interesting point about colleges as well. You know, make sure that you're quite informed about the college you're selecting, because some colleges have certain extra sort of steps in this process. Some have, you know, admissions tests that others don't.
Yeah.
So it's better to be really well informed about that.
Yeah, and so you can sort of not worry about that if you're applying to Oxford, because at Oxford it's all very centralized. Whereas if you're applying to Cambridge, James is absolutely right. There are certain sets of colleges which maybe ask for more submitted work to be handed in, ask for a test, ask for particular A levels. It can vary quite a lot. So yeah, do look into that. Someone has asked, what is the process for applying for this program? Have a chat with us. We don't take on any students that we haven't spoken with. We really need to speak with you and make sure that you're right for this and this is right for you. How are interviews made quantitative to compare between candidates? Very good question. And actually, so this is, so I studied experimental psychology at Christ Church in Oxford. This has been asked at interview. So we're not going to go through a whole potential Oxford interview question today. We will likely do that in a couple months' time when we're getting close to interviews. But ultimately, there are quite a few methods that are implemented for making sure that these interviews are as reliable as possible. So you will pretty much always be interviewed by at least 2 people at a time, so they can have you know, cross-compare their ratings. They also have to review immediately rather than sort of at the end of the day, because otherwise you might have forgotten. And then you have sort of they have a bit of a conference as well between all the department heads, not department heads, college heads, to sort of talk about differences. And they also standardize a number of questions that they'll ask at interview. So there's a number of different things that they do to try and make it as fair as possible. Ultimately, the guiding principle that you should be aware of is Oxford and Cambridge want to take on the best students. Okay, so they're not going to allow for their system to fail at that. So they're not going to allow for their interviews to not be able to suss that out. They're not going to allow for the fact that, oh, well, the best students just applied to one college this year, so now we've got weaker students because they couldn't take them all on. They're not going to allow that. They're going to design a system which means that they can take on the best students. Your job is to be the best student. Your job is to be the best candidate. And obviously we know where to work on if you want to do that. Anna has asked, what would you recommend me to do if there are no GCSEs in my country? She's applying to E&M at Oxford. So again, this is a more broad point. If you're an international student and you don't have any GCSEs, that's fine. They will understand that. They will know, you know, you didn't sit GCSEs at your school. They will pay more attention to your predicted grades and to your admissions test score. Okay, so you're applying for E&M, the most competitive degree at Oxford. Your TSA score needs to be very, very good. And then I've got a few questions from Michelle. I think I recognize your name, Michelle. I think you booked a few different consultations and put different phone numbers in, and that's caused us a bit of confusion. If you could try again, make sure that the phone number's right, and we'll do our best to get in touch with you. And you know, occasionally we do have, so sometimes our consultations run over. So occasionally we are late for our slots. We you know, do apologize for when that happens. We try to you know, keep things as on time as possible. But guys, if you leave us your contact details, we will always come back to you, and we'll always try and speak with you, you know, whenever we can. You did ask, what if I don't have an admissions test for my course? What matters more then? That's an interesting point. So let's take chemistry as an example. So chemistry at Oxford, no admissions test. And James was saying earlier that Oxford interview very many people, so around 30%. That's absolutely true on average. But for the subjects that don't have admissions tests, they interview at a really high rate. So chemistry, they interview pretty much 90% of their applicants. Okay, so naturally in that case, you're very likely to get to interview. And of course, they're going to be evaluating you based on your grades, your interview, and to a small degree, your personal statement and your school reference. Okay. There have been, hold on, there's been one question in the chat. What if the student hasn't identified themselves of the subject and school they're going to apply? Any information advice will be provided during this finding process? So Elaine, I think what you're asking is, what if a student speaks to us, you know, we have a discussion and they might say, you know, we really want to go to Oxbridge, but we don't actually know if we want to do, the example that the one that happens the most commonly is, I don't know if I want to do PPE at Oxford or I want to do economics at Cambridge. If that's what you're asking, then one of the first things that we'll do in the program is they will spend some time with a tutor who studied PPE, spend some time with a tutor who studied economics at Cambridge, and really work out which course they would be most suitable for and would be most suitable for them. Of course, if it's a, what am I trying to say? If it's a more broad difference than that, so let's say you're unsure if you want to do engineering or history, a bit strange, but that might be the two things that you're weighing up. When I was applying, I was weighing up maths, history, and psychology, so you know it can happen. Normally what students would do is they'd have those separate consultations with different tutors, and they'd also have access to enrichment seminars spanning all their areas of interest. So they'd come to our STEM seminars as well as our humanities seminars. And so there are 5 streams altogether: STEM, humanities, medicine, economics, law. So that there's lots of breadth for students to go to, particularly for our younger students, our students in year 10 and year 11. Those are the ones who, you know, completely understandably are less certain about exactly what they want to study. So whilst we're helping them develop academic skills, they're exploring all these different subject areas.
So somebody's asked here, do most medical course applicants leave the fifth choice blank? So if I'm understanding this correctly, the answer is no, they don't. And my advice would be, don't do that, please. I've spoken to quite a number of students recently, since A levels were sort of published, who and predictions, who left their fifth choice blank, didn't get one of their four medical choices, and now kind of stuck. Ultimately, it's so competitive that fifth choice exists as a route into medicine. Okay, be it through sort of postgraduate study, perhaps. But if you leave it blank, I just don't understand why anybody would do that. I apologize if I've misunderstood, but absolutely make a fifth choice, and make a fifth choice that's meaningful as well, because you may well end up taking that fifth choice.
Yeah, we do get, I think we can get quite emotional about certain topics, because we speak with lots of students who are at the end of the process and have been really let down by bad advice and have made wrong decisions. And it's quite hard to hear, because we know that these are really strong students, but they've just been told to do the wrong thing. But yeah, definitely leave yourself a choice. A while ago, actually, you could pick 5 medical schools, but they mandated that one of them wasn't a medical school because so many students were ending up with no offers and nothing to do. People often think medicine, that they underappreciate how competitive medicine is. Everyone says, oh, medicine is competitive. But we'll speak with lots of students who have straight A stars at GCSE, straight A stars at A level, and they think it'll be fine. And invariably, we speak with lots of students who have been through an application process with straight A stars at GCSE and straight A levels and can end up with no offers. It's very possible. The application process is really important, and it's important to have a backup.
Somebody else here has asked, is it worth applying for the program if I'm going into year 13 this September, and thus would be finishing my application by this October? Well, actually, we work with a lot of students at sort of different times throughout the application process, but actually we work with a lot of students at this time of year. You can imagine a lot of students are sort of on their summer holidays. They've stopped thinking about, their AS levels, and they're sort of thinking, oh dear, I have an admissions test in a couple of months. So actually, this is the point in a lot of students' journeys where we actually sort of first meet you. So in many ways, this is the critical time for you in your application. So we would really like the opportunity to speak to you. This would be a really good time to start, because you're going to be taking a test in a couple of months. You need to understand how you're going to approach the next few months, and how you're going to be preparing effectively, whether you work with us or you don't. Sort of having some clarity on that, I think, is really important. Yeah,
a couple of people have asked, what to do with that fifth choice. Should they, still make the fifth choice like a non-medical one at Oxbridge? That's quite a, what am I trying to say? That's quite, it depends. It depends is what I'm trying to say. It depends a bit on you. And that's something I'd rather have a proper discussion with you guys about, and make sure we're giving the right kind of recommendation. Someone asked, how much does the personal statement matter? That came in quite early on in the presentation. Hopefully not that much, but still, even though it doesn't matter that much, it's still something that you are being measured on. So you still want to make it as perfect as possible. And someone said that they're finished year 13, you're resitting an A level, so you can reapply to Cambridge. Sorry, you weren't successful first time around. You're going for HSPS, okay. Yeah, we support students for HSPS. The specific program as to what would be best for you is something which we'd only be able to work out from a proper conversation. Please leave your phone number with us, or book a consultation. We don't, I'm afraid we don't do these kind of consultations over email. It's just so slow. We are going to bother you with all our questions, and it would take a really long time to get that all sorted out over email. Okay, and someone's asked, I think we're sort of getting to the end of our questions. So if anyone else, if anyone's been sitting on a question, they've been not sure whether to ask it, now's the time. What is the difference between IGCSE and GCSE? The I stands for international. as far as I know. And so typically the IGCSE is what people abroad sit, and the GCSE is what people in the UK sit. You can sit IGCSEs in the UK. You know, they're sort of, and certain schools do that. But, you know, broadly speaking, there's not really that significant a difference between them. You know, I wouldn't worry about that too much. If you've got IGCSEs and you're thinking, oh, is that not good as GCSE? Don't worry about it, or vice versa. Ultimately, they sort of still recognize them as like similar qualifications.
I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that actually there's a limit on the number of IGCSEs that you can take, which is lower than the number of GCSEs that you can take. So in a way, you've got to make sure that you're getting excellent scores on your IGCSEs because you have fewer of them and therefore fewer opportunities to get sort of A's and top end scores, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's worth bearing in mind that your GCSEs are rated in two ways. So your total number of A stars and also your ratio of A star grades to non-A star grades. So it's all well and good to have 13 GCSEs, but if 9 of them are A stars and 4 of them are Bs, that's actually worse than having 8 A stars, because that ratio brings you down. So actually, sometimes less is more. And it's kind of a similar principle to that A level. What has happened to my presentation? Do you just see a black screen?
Yeah.
There we go. We're back.
Time's out.
Look, so I think we've come to the end of pretty much all the questions, and I know, James, you've got well, it's actually a really nice day. Is it nice where you are?
I'm scared to look actually because I'm supposed to be going to barbecue in a moment, which I think will probably be one of the last barbecues of the summer.
Oh, no way. It's August. It's August still.
Devastating. Yeah, I know.
Anyway, thank you all for coming along. If you had more things that you wanted to talk about, but we couldn't answer them or we didn't quite give you the answer you looked for, please do have a chat with us. Otherwise, enjoy your weekends. Enjoy what James has declared is the last barbecuing day of the season, because there won't be any more after this. And, you know, some of you will see next week. So look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye, everyone.
See you guys. Bye-bye.